So there's always, when you're a festival director, there's always these wonderful moments. So artistic director Johan Dahlgren, welcome. And there's these wonderful moments when the festival gets going and it starts, and then you have to prepare your first discussions and the opening speech and so on. And at the last moment, of course, there comes something that happened to happen the last day. So you're always sort of like entering into the moment where you sort of like have to do the introduction of all things and so on, and you realize that you really haven't done your homework. And then at a strange moment, you suddenly realize, like, I've been doing a lot of homework the last year. So of some strange, weird reasons, it tends to go so that you sort of know what you're talking about anyway. So I'll hope we'll have a lucky one around that this time. So what we are dealing with this year at the festival is games of participation as a theme, and that to a certain way is a continuation a little bit of last year's theme, where we sort of like thought about a lot of political music of engagement. And so we did a very large project around Hans Werner Henze's voices with contemporary political songs next to them. And so on, probably one of the biggest in the near history of the festival. And equally on a lot of other pieces and composers who in the 70s and 80s, 1970s and 80s really dealt with these sort of like questions. So it was sort of seen from the festival history point of view, quite historical festival, because we of course are usually thinking about that we're really doing with contemporary things, but of a weird reason these sort of things and themes suddenly felt quite up to date of political reasons that perhaps are not so totally nice as we know what's going on in the world and so on. And of course we realized that, well, we didn't really close the chapter and so on. So there's in fact a lot more on these questions that is of actuality. And at the same time, so what we can say is that we are really talking all the music composed and by composers involved and so on are in fact by, well, I will say it later on today, but of the same age of me or younger. So sort of like to a certain degree by the music written. So we are really talking about very much the concerns and ideas and viewpoints of people who sort of like factually became after Henze's voices. And at the moment we are very much living with a time of engagement, of participation, always when big societal changes happens, and that's probably something we can talk about later on. It affects very strongly art practices. There's the famous book by Claire Bishop, Artificial Health, that is always very often referred to in situations like these, and that very much sort of like talks about that when there's a societal breaking point or something like that, it starts to affect art in different ways, and it's sort of quite natural when we think about that. And very often it very much affects the democratic processes in art making and so on. And this is sort of like, and equally, suddenly becomes moments of manifests or manifestos and so on. And I thought I wrote a very clever column a few years ago where I thought this was the age of manifestos was over, and I realized I was totally wrong in the sense that at the time, equally again, we are really very much in, well, you could talk in a very spicy ways about manifestos, or simplify what a manifesto is. It usually has been by a male artist, young male artist who wants a lot of attention. And then he gets attention, and later on he will explain the next decades why he really didn't mean what he was saying when he was young. And but he got the attention. And in fact, that to a certain way is one layer of these sort of things. And we all want attention, and during different times of art history, it has very much been about attention. And and I think these are positive things and so on. But during confrontational, complex times, there becomes two different games about how to get attention and so on, and they can have very different qualities about these sort of things, and that's what we are seeing around in the world all the time. So the same cake has different parts of it. There's the positive and the negative sides, and very often what I'm trying to, at least in my own programming or what to put on the table, not really have a personal stance of either direction, but basically sort of like let the different artists and the different thoughts speak with each other, and then sort of like come to so that the audience can amongst themselves discuss and have different viewpoints to these sort of things. And that perhaps to a short way is perhaps a sort of like giving a little bit of fluid, unclear picture about, without really starting to open up a separate piece or separate concert during the festival, but tell that these, in one way, I think very much of the pieces that we are dealing with, amongst others, are to a certain degree between the lines asking these sort of questions from very different viewpoints during the festival. And perhaps in this situation, of course, when starting to think about these sort of questions, we at Time of Music and Viitasaari City has been too involved thinking about Institute for New Music, different sort of shapes, and gotten sort of grants to the city for developing these sort of things. So these are two from the point of view from the festival and from the city issues that probably interests us and so on. So it makes then sense that we had a certain interest to invite artists and teachers, mentors, who are specialists and have different viewpoints on these sort of genres and questions from very different viewpoints. And that's why we have both Jesper and Kathy here present, in the sense that you are very well known for working with these sort of like things, but they're coming out in very different shapes with both of you. So perhaps we agreed that you would present first, Jesper. Yes. So then I start presenting you first. Yes. Jesper and I, in fact, knew, I think, from Ung Nordisk Musiikin and things alike in the mid-90s. So we have a long history of things, music-wise, and belong to the same generation, and so on. And Jesper has, during the last decade, sort of like very much, I think, what sort of comes up with you is that you are always integrated different styles, played in an exciting way from folk music to pop, contemporary art music, and so on, and improvised music, but never really sort of like have a feeling that you think that you're really trying to do a collage of different styles, but they have sort of like mingled all together in and became something very natural for you stylistically. So without really lifting up all the different works and so on, what that sort of like generated then is that you started to work on different musical software for really solving problems for yourself. And it clearly solved a lot of problems, but equally it generated a lot of sort of really exciting software and opportunities and tools that can engage with engaging people with different musical backgrounds. So both a specialist and a beginner can use the same tool on different levels of integrating ideas of things. Perhaps this is the moment where I give the word to you to continue the show.
Perfect. That one. Perfect. Yeah, so first, thanks a lot for the invitation to be here. It's really, I've always known of this festival, of course, throughout my career, but I've never been here. So it's really fascinating to finally be here in this, with the history that this festival has. So that's really nice. And to speak a little bit about the topics that you mentioned, I think that in one way, the topic you talk about is not a topic, but more like some kind of aspects. And Kathy and I have different angles, and not really on the same thing, but things that are touching and overlapping in different ways. And I think I'll start actually with the part where you talk about tools for professionals and non-professionals alike, because that's really has been to some extent the core of what I'm doing. And it probably comes from me starting playing music very late. So I started playing punk rock in my late teens. So because I didn't play an instrument, so then you can play punk. So we had a band, and I tried to learn some instrument, but I didn't practice. So I wrote some songs instead, and they grew, and I started compose. Started studying in different ways, and trying to find my way into this like contemporary music world, learning how to read and write music in my 20s, so always feeling lost, and really realizing that I needed tools to be able to compose, and trying to find a way of like expressing myself, having control over the totality, but still be free to improvise with what I'm doing. And this has led to me developing some tools that have been used in everything from children's workshops with dance, with motion sensors, driving real-time music. I've done a lot of work with an ensemble, or with a group called Share Music that works in the UK and in Sweden. We work with people with disabilities of different sorts that don't be able to play an instrument but can be super musical. How can they access music through electronic means? So there have been soloists with orchestra pieces I've done and things like that. So been many different aspects. But at the same time, the same technology has been used by world-class soloists and conductors to drive real-time music together with the live instruments. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but I also want to play some examples of what it is and what it has been for me. I think I'll actually start by just playing a little bit of the actual tool. If we can get that up and running. So, yes, you see something there? Yeah. So this is one version of this technology. It's an app that exists on the App Store. It's called Gestrument, as a gesture instrument. And it was something that I developed first for my own compositional needs. And then I needed that, and I used it, and I showcased that to others, and people were interested, so we released it as an app. And it basically plays music based on gestures. So you set up the rules for the music, and then you're free to play and improvise within that. I will control that now with a hand detector, a motion sensor. It's not my app, but there exist many of these, where I can then play music with my hand. And we have this a little beeping noise now and then because of the iPad to computer connection. See if I can get it a little louder. So something like that. And that is me then just setting up the rules of a music that I wanted to explore. Here's a very simple chord sequence that is the defining rules. And then that can be utilized by me in different ways. Oh, I'll turn this off. But I'll showcase a little bit how that has been used in different areas, because part of the reason you invited me was because of how this technology has then been used now, utilized in video games as well. But I'll start with an example of my own music, just a trailer of a piece that I did a few years ago for Finnish conductor Esa-Pekka Salonen, Swedish clarinet player Martin Fröst, and the Swedish Radio Symphony Orchestra. So this is a 3-minute trailer that showcases a little bit of what that piece is about, to just give an example of my music. You don't see that? Okay. Then. There it is. Good. Thanks for telling me, because I saw it here. Gone again? I can stop there. It's just an example anyway. Oh, sorry, I'll go to this. But can you bring it up again?
I'll try.
Yeah. Is there a bad connection somewhere?
I think. No.
Yeah, good. Because I want to make a bridge between the art projects that I've been doing into then the video game aspect that we just talked about. So this technology turned out to be something that was actually needed in the video game sphere. I don't know anything about video games, so I wouldn't know, but I had people telling me that I should try to have this into video games. Because in video games, 15 years ago, everything you saw was hard-coded. You had like video files and things that you could interact with in some ways. But then that changed when you have rule-based systems. So you have physics engines and shaders and lots of things that are being driven in real time, depending on what the gamer is doing. But the music is still hard-coded audio loops. So they are fixed. And you can, of course, jump between the loops, and you can have different stems, and you can work with that. But it's basically hard-coded, apart from everything else. And this system that I developed is a way of driving music in real time. It's in between a playable instrument and the composition. So it really defines the same area as the video game engines do. And we did this amazing project with the Royal Shakespeare Company a few years ago. It was during COVID, so it was supposed to be a site-specific installation, but turned out to become an online experience instead, where there were 5 actors from the Royal Shakespeare Company with motion capture suits that were driving avatars inside of a game engine in real time. And they were also driving the music. So we had both a combination of recorded pieces, an orchestra piece by me, by Esa-Pekka Salonen, and by Ravel, that were synchronized with the real-time music that they generated with their movements. So I'll just show you a little snippet of that, because that's really like an artistic project set in a video game engine. But even more fascinating was actually to see it happening live. So I think that when you see it presented like this, the audience just saw a screen of what was presented, but in the studio you saw the people moving and doing all these things in real life. So I'll just have a short snippet of that just to see what actually happened behind the scenes. You have a virtual cameraman following the movements and then shaping the angle of what people actually see on the screen. And you have several actors whose movements are synchronized, so chord sequences are synchronized together, so when they play it always makes sense. So it's a very, very high profile to some extent, but also very troublesome project, because we have like several hundred people accessing the same computers from all over the world in real time. So one day you set up everything perfectly so that everyone was synchronized, and then the next day someone has changed some other aspect of the same things, and all of a sudden nothing worked. So it was really, really tough project, but it was fantastic to go through and do it. And that was basically the same time as when my technology went into the video game world more properly. So I have a company now called Reactional Music, which was founded when we met with some people, some really like high-profile people from the video game industry. Our chairman of the board is called Kelly Sumner. He was the CEO that released Guitar Hero. He released the first Grand Theft Auto, Fall Guys, many big titles he has under his belt. So when he saw this, he really felt, okay, this is something that we need in the video game industry. So we've been working with him and his team since then to make that happen. But it's a big undertaking, something that takes a long time, and it's aesthetically something that I'm not really involved in the music making, but I find this way of working with these tools fascinating, because you could actually reimagine composition to an extent. You can have a composition that is composed by someone, but still open for giving agency to audiences or participants in different way. So I really enjoy that concept of and those aspects. So that's what I'm trying to do in my own artistic practice. But I'll show you just as a final thing, a video of what that means. Like, okay, so this technology in video games, because it opened up something that I didn't think of in the beginning. We just thought of, okay, this will be able to make the music much more cinematic. If you see a film, of course, when the bad guy is defeated, he falls down on a heavy beat in the music. But that doesn't happen in a game, because you don't know when that will happen. So you can't prepare it. But with this technology you can. You'll see a video soon with a hero that jumps, and the landing will always be in sync with the music, because we can have a two-way communication between what you see and what you hear. So that in itself was something that we were interested in, like making the music more interactive and more driven by the gamer. But actually that opened up another thing that we didn't think of in the beginning, which is the possibility of bringing in recorded music, as we did in this Dream project. So basically, if you design a game with this technology, you can let the gamer then play that game with the sound effects and everything synchronized as the game designer wanted, but then bring in any music you want. So you can play it with Brahms or Metallica or Britney Spears or whatever, and it will always be in sync and in pitch put together. So I'll show you, it's just a minute and a half showing a little bit of how that works, more from a commercial angle. Yes. So with that, I think I leave over to something completely different. Okay, Kathy.
Thank you. Amazing.
So I probably should introduce you, just in case. Yes. With the microphone. Yes. Hello. Okay, so we are happy to have Kathy Milliken over here. And Kathy, Australian who has been residing for very many decades already in Germany. You were one of the first members of Ensemble Modern, and a long history as a performer, composer, improviser, and so on. And equally, we know you very well for your very admired work with music and social engagement. And so you worked with many different institutions on participatory projects. You were, during Simon Rattle's reign at Berlin Philharmonic, the person in charge of the audience program, educational program, and factually you've composed a lot of pieces around that, and worked, in fact, your last years on dissertation on that subject. It turns out that your supervisor was my colleague from San Diego, so that was a funny moment to realize. But nevertheless, Vanessa Tomlinson, that for sure would be one person to get over here too at some stage. And so you have enormous knowledge about different viewpoints of participation and engaging especially with different communities and involving them in your music, both in your music and creating music with them, with music they are choosing. So I leave the stage to you.
So the title of what I'm going to talk about is a little bit mysterious. I call it Fluid Public. And by public, I'm talking about everyone in this room, including musicians, including audience. And the interesting thing about today is that so much is happening. We're in such times of flow, times of unfortunate instability, and we're in times where we're also questioning the absolutes of before. And in a sense, it feels like a new way of examining where we are, and what we're doing. So if we just look at the word audience and look at the word participation, it seems to be that audience is generally participating by listening. And in fact, I am speaking and you are indeed hopefully listening. But if I come out, I find there's an area here which I have to cross, and then I'm over to you. But what happens if there's a fluidity? What happens if we actually come out and meet? What happens if we start to hear from the audience? Each of you is single. What is the audience anyway? It's not a thing. It's a lot of people who've come from their homes, driven here, maybe a bit late, maybe a bit stressed, maybe totally chill. We don't know. But you're all sitting there listening in your listening space. And in fact, what happens if we can actually have some way of not only identifying particular spots, particular people in the public, but what happens if the public also has the chance to experience the whole space? Because when musicians are playing, we're playing out, and the acoustics of a room are generally so that they go out. But in fact, modern concert halls are so beautiful that when you have audience making sound, the whole concert hall opens up to become a space of listening. You hear left, right, up, down. You hear a whole world of physical space and potentially acoustic space if you're going to make a sound. So I'm going to actually ask you to make a sound. Let's just take a couple of minutes. You can anyone click? Can everyone click? Already sounding beautiful. What about some sort of clap, a nice with a bit of resonance in? very quiet, very quiet. Yeah, that's good. Or you can, if you want to, and you feel particularly enthused and in a good mood, you can, a little bit of a note, yeah? So I'm going to divide you into 4 parts, okay? So I know a joke in 4 parts too, but I'm not going to do it now. There's 1 half here, 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. Now, we're not going to do it all at the same time. I'm just going to give you a general instruction during which each of you is free to do your sound in that time, okay? Should we try you? Here we go. Begin now. Okay, how about we have something a bit louder? Some of you clap, maybe a voice or a loud click, yeah? Here we go again. Beautiful. So it's just 1 or 2, and then you're finished. Let's try this one. So here we go. So it's just once, but really present. Okay, here we go. Very good. Okay, so now comes an experiment. So it's only just 1 action and then you stop, okay? Beautiful. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. So why fluid? So much is fluid today, and it is possible to engage the audience, but rather all of these single wonderful people who've decided to come and have a listening experience. But it is possible to also have a concept where we are engaging with the audience, because the interesting thing is what you are experiencing now, the positioning of sound, whether a sound is long or short, whether it's louder or softer, whether the direction of the sound, are all parameters that musicians are using all the time. So in fact, the fluidity of the concept of music is transferable in very, very simple ways to audience, and it's the same, exactly the same thing that we musicians are doing. So let's just take a moment, and now we're going to go back. It is actually the right of society to be included culturally in making music. And in fact, the International Music Council has developed out of the international rights, they've made 5 music rights, 3 of which are for audience and public and society, and the last 2 are actually rights for musicians. So it is actually really acknowledged that the cultural output of society is general. It's not only the musicians that have a cultural right, obviously, it's everyone in society. And it is, of course, very beautiful if there are ways and means of creating moments of coming together and fusion, whether it be by listening, which is an active activity of an audience, or actually also making sound and music in space and time. So let's make another jump, because what we're doing here, or the project that I'm involved in, is making a participatory performance piece. And I'm doing this with some wonderful young musicians here. And we are thinking of ways in which the music that we're making can actually also travel to the public and back again. We're thinking of ways of engagement. When we do think of ways of engagement, it's necessary for us to actually take off our musician hat and actually examine, what is it that we're doing? What are these sounds? What are they for? What would they mean to an audience? I keep saying an audience, but of course you're all brilliant single people. What does it mean for them to take on these sounds? So, of course, we think about why are we doing this, with whom, for whom, and what are we doing? So that in fact the context, the fact that we're in a festival, and the fact that we actually do have a performance on Sunday at 2 p.m. for anyone who can come. The fact that it's published, which is a wonderful thing. That also, we know the size of the room, we know how many people may come, we know the acoustics of the room. So there are already many decisions that we can make while we're devising this piece. The thing about making creative or participatory music or collaborative music is that it reaches into different realms depending on the context that I just mentioned before. So it might be that, yes, Johan mentioned that I worked in the education department of the Berlin Philharmonic, and that was really very much not only an educational thing when we were going into schools, but also social, because we went into prisons, we were in old people's home, and there were many different reasons why we were making music, and the way we were making music in these situations really changed as well. We're back again. However, it's not only when we make these works that we say, yes, we're being educational, or yes, we've got a social hat on, or we might even have a healing hat on, which I'll show you a project later on that definitely had a healing hat. But there's no reason why we can't have an artistic hat too, because we're putting all of our artistic knowledge and sharing it in the project that we're doing. So Nicolas Bourriot, who was also a colleague of Claire Bishop, whom you mentioned, has set up a description of what collaborative creative projects can be. And he's defined them as a set of artistic practices which take as their theoretical and practical point of departure the whole of human relations and their social context, rather than an independent and private space. Now, if we're thinking of composers in their room composing a work for orchestra, that is an individual composer in their private space making music for a larger context. But it's also possible to consider artists of any genre making music with other people. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, I'm just saying we're fluid here. We're fluid in moving between different modes and ways of composing and making music. So I like to think, for example, with composers, because I am working with composers this week and I am a composer myself, I like to think of the idea of sole authorship and shared authorship, which means not only sharing within the composer collaboration, but also sharing with audience. I like to think of it as a continuum, so that it's not one or the other. It might be that you converge more on one side than the other in different pieces of artwork or music works, but it's always in your own way of making music as musicians. It's like a continuum that you go back and forth between more participatory or more solo authored, or in fact you find ways of making music as Jesper showed us, which I find quite amazing. So it's a very fluid thing. It can be a very fluid thing. What you need for such processes is, for example, you might wish to let the audience know what you're going to be doing with them during a show, and you might have a short rehearsal. You need time for that. You also need, if you're collaborating with other musicians and composers, you need a type of mutuality. You need a type of common ground that you're working from, and you need to find that. And now we get into a whole sort of theory of what collaboration is, and that is certainly, it's a skill in negotiation, it's a skill in communication, it requires a a democratic approach. It requires the admitting that there's an equity in ownership or authorship, that there's an equality of control. You might find with my musicians that I'm working with, occasionally I get a bit excited and I say, oh, it should be like that and it should be like that. And then I already notice that they're already tuning out. And I know, it's not about what I want. And so hopefully I'll remember to say, yes, but wait a minute, what is it that you're thinking? Now, this is an interesting thing with composers, which I'll talk about in a minute. What you also need is just a willingness to move outside habitual practices. It's extraordinary how we do things the same every day, and that's okay. You can't invent how to brush your teeth new every day. There are certain ways where it makes sense to do it the same way, and you know how you like to make your coffee, and you know how you like to find your way to work or to school or wherever. There are certain rituals that we go about. But there are certain things about art and making art together that are actually conducive to asking questions about the way you think about things. And this is the beauty of art and participating, collaborating with people, that you actually are challenged to think of things in a new way. And that's what artists do. And that's why art, taken as an umbrella for different ways of practicing art, whether it be an educationalist, but still a creative collaborator, working in a healing atmosphere, but still creatively and collaboratively, working in, I said education, social, or whether you really want to make a piece of art that includes participation, which defines the work of art that you're making. All of these different ways of practices are fluid for the artists themselves, together with the people who are coming to witness their work. So I'm going to now just talk about a couple of projects to let you know the different types of things that I've done. Comfort Ye was a work, it was an opera made around Handel's Messiah, and it was carried out in townships. So I went with a team into township and we developed text with the school choir, and my God, were they a school choir. I had never heard a choir like that. Voices just reached out, extraordinary. And so you can see in the top picture we were creating together, and it became the opera that you see here. The very, very interesting thing was that the most important part about this project was what we did in the schools. Certainly the fact that they acted and performed in this opera gave a great sense of confidence. But I would say it was very much a social project in a sense, because we were invited into their social fabric and they were invited into our making fabric, our way of making art together. This was another project in Japan, and it was done immediately after the tsunami, the great earthquake of 2011 in March. And I went to a place with a group of art makers called Kamaishi, and it was virtually flattened. It was a valley, and unfortunately the sea came in, taking everything with it in the valley, and it went 10 miles inland. Everyone who went up on the hills was able to be saved. So this temple here, the Hojuji temple, was saved. This piece was made with local wind band from schools, local choirs. We began outside with the local priest ringing the temple bell and having an installation of brass instruments. And I worked with the choirs in their rooms. That it was all temporary housing. There was nothing, not really much left. It was a really dire, sad time for a lot of people. And these musical moments were times where we could really enter into a space together that was safe and filled with sound and filled with sometimes joy. It was also called messages because they made different messages which were projected, which were spoken, which we made songs about. There were messages of future, mirai, for young people, messages of courage, messages of strength in your family and friends. So very much a healing project. That was followed the year later by another project in the same area called We Are All Stars, and we went down to the sea because until that moment, most people had not been back to the sea because of the tragic incidents of drownings because of the tsunami that rushed into the city. So this was also a healing moment with local fishermen, with the wind band going down there, playing the wind band songs installation. And at night we also took a light because they'd told us how beautiful, strangely, the stars were the night of the tsunami when they were on the hills, when they'd escaped to the hills, looking up for the first time, they were able to see stars. So we gave them lights in their hand and made lights, a light choreography, which you see here. So there are all actions of healing, as a matter of fact. Another project was, and this was much more similar to what I'm doing here, in that it was in the auspices of the Hamburg Festival. And it was a song project, a music project, and it brought various parts of Hamburg together. There was a very rich area that made texts, and they got in touch with a very poor area. So there were sort of social aspects. We'd invited the Weltkapelle, which is a group of Iranian and Syrian refugees who had a music group. So we brought the university choir. There were some professional musicians. There were various music groups of oud players and guitar players, percussion players, a women's choir singing songs from the 60s and 70s. So you can see, I mean, it was such a diaspora of Hamburg. It was really, and texts about Hamburg. So that was really lovely. There we see the women's choir in the top actually doing a choreography of ocean drums. And there we have some of the oud and mandolin players. Okay, I'm not quite sure why that started playing, but here we go. This is another project. I'll tell you about it in a minute. That's unfortunate. Okay. Let me see. I'm not quite sure if I'm at the beginning or I'm at the end. It shouldn't be. There we go. This might work. So I might have to start that little bit again. See if you can recognize Dietmar, who's sitting there. He's a treasured colleague I've had for many years. Dietmar Wiesner. And he's here with the International Ensemble Moderne Academy, and they're involved tonight. Yep. No. Oh, there we go. Okay. That's not quite the one I want. I want this one. And here we go.
We have to click it. No.
Okay, so that last project was a composition which was to make a piece of art music which would involve audience. So every audience member received a bag with different objects. There was a card with a pencil, and during the first part of the concert, which was more of a rehearsal for the audience and the players, the audience actually made up a text about a favourite place to be, and these cards were handed to the performers, which they improvised on. We heard a little bit of that. There were lights, so everyone became lighting masters. There were stones, bells, and the interesting thing was to make the music so that they really involved the sound of bells and stones in a way that became very integrative, so that the ensemble was also playing stones at some point. And I loved the idea of making an installative concert work, which meant sometimes listening, sometimes playing, sometimes doing, sometimes making, and everyone was part of that whole process, either beforehand or during the short rehearsal before the piece. So that I think there are various ways of doing participation. The ways that I showed you now were purely to show that participating work and collaborative work can have different outreaches, can have different hats on: social, educative, healing. Always, of course, as an artist, there's the desire to make a work of art. So, in the best spirit possible, I do invite you to our show on Sunday at 2 p.m. and hope that you will become makers and performers with us in a fluid, beautiful sense. We invite you. So thank you very much for listening.
So thank you for that, Jesper and Kathy. So now the idea is that we are a little bit sharing our thoughts and discussing on these sort of things at the same time. So you're free to ask and jump in totally freely as you wish, and then we'll get the audience, you participate, you to join on questions and so on. The natural question probably would be to continue now with what you just presented, was that Night Shift was basically a piece, part of the Art Mentor Luzern commissions that linked to this Connect project that is in fact very much about connecting with the audience. And Oscar Bianchi Sorango that we are hearing tonight is one of the other ones in that series. Then there's a bunch of other pieces like Philip Venable's Gender Agenda, just to mention one, and so on, which all takes a different viewpoint to these sort of things. You worked with a lot of different communities, a lot of different sort of like projects around these sort of things and so on. So theoretically, you're probably one of those who knows most about these sort of things. What sort of challenges and pitfalls can you see in different areas about? Because everybody talks about, everybody wants these things, but it's for sure something that is not very easy. And it needs really a sort of like way to you need to be very sensitive and look 360 degrees around and understand what goes on when you're working with these things.
I think the interesting thing is when you begin a project, the anxiety about that one has beforehand is justified, because you really have to step up as an artist and take responsibility for meeting people who come to you with very full lives, maybe some problems just as you have. So in fact, that moment of meeting is then when it actually finally happens, is a beautiful release, because suddenly there are people in the flesh and you can see and feel what's in the room. The thing about that also is that, in fact, it's not that you know everything, it's admitting that you know nothing at that moment. You have a blank page, which every composer knows about anyway. So, in fact, it's not very different from composing as a sole author to actually composing with others. There's always a blank page that you start with. What follows then is a process of deliberation, a process of discussion, a process of negotiation. Now, this negotiation thing is a very interesting thing, because when you're collaborating or participating with people beforehand, when you're making a piece beforehand, I'm not talking about participation in the moment in the concert. I'm actually saying, let's all get together and make a piece, yeah? So in that moment, various people in the room are going to have different expertise, thank you. They're going to have different expertise. So you've got to be very respectful of that. On the other hand, you have the musical expertise. And what you have to be careful of as a composer, I'll tell you a little secret about composers. Composers get very thingy about their idea. And for a composer, what is so important is that that idea gets sounded. So when a composer has an idea in a group, somehow a pack of wild dogs coming towards them will not stop them from wanting to hear that idea. So they become very difficult partners to deal with. And that mostly is oneself. You discover yourself, you're hanging on to an idea, and there are people around you who actually have other perfectly beautiful ideas too. So that's one thing, just a hint to the musicians amongst us, that the fluidity also applies to you and me, yeah? It's letting go and listening. And so that's what you have in a sense of collaborative practice and participatory practice. It's simply listening.
Yeah, I want to chime in with a story that of something completely different, but with the audience and the connection to an audience. I had one of my finest audience interaction, actually in the north of Sweden, in Luleå. I've been working with a Finnish author called Märta Tikkanen, that you Finns probably know of, and I've been working with her for several pieces, and we did a radiophonic piece together. So she was invited to talk about her authorship up in Luleå, and she asked me to come along and play this radiophonic piece at the same time. I think we should probably turn the others off because we have some feedback. And the organizers up there, they heard my piece, and it was quite hardcore, they thought, so they were quite scared of how that would be perceived by the audience, because the audience was there for Märta. So they asked me to, can we do something about it? It's a little bit long and it's a little bit hardcore. Maybe we'll do like this. So she talks, and then we have a break, and then just before the break you can say a few words, and then if someone stays you can play your piece, more or less. So I had that in mind when I was there, and I was asked up on the stage after she did her fantastic presentation, and I spoke a little bit about this piece, and I was, it's a bit hardcore and it might be difficult to listen to, and I was saying some things like that, and then there was this break, everyone came back in, listened to that 20-minute piece, and afterwards this old woman came up to me and said, "You shouldn't underestimate your audience." She was really mad at me because I'd been sitting there and like apologizing, saying this is probably too difficult for you. And it was not me who wanted to do that, it was the organizer, but I filtered that through me. And I was so happy when she said it, like, thank you, that's exactly what I needed to hear. So it was really a powerful experience and a powerful meeting, which is of course what you're talking about, that listening is a very active experience. So that's also something that I'm thinking a lot about this with interaction, with interactive technology and music. Of course, the traditional way of sitting in a concert, being immersed in that, is something that it's not against that. It's just like a complementary other type of experience. But I do think that this, coming back to what I'm dealing with, I do think that these digital tools can actually open up, and especially in this age when younger people are so used to being part of their own experience, not just taking in whatever other people have done, but actually collaborating somehow, like changing things and doing things. If we can find a way, and that's what we've been looking at with this, if we can find a way of making sure that the artist is still in control, but still inviting the audience to participate in their own experience. So with this technology, we started experimenting with having musicians playing live, and at the same time having an audience member, someone accompanying that through this technology, so you could actually play together with your favorite artist in real time. And it can be one artist and 10,000 people playing at the same time. Everyone has a little bit different experience. Everyone controls their own experience, but still the rules were set by the artist, so it's the artist who is in control. And that opens up so many new possibilities and ideas that I think are really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I did want to just say something. I also think, I love that story about the woman coming up to you, and I fully support that exactly that. One should not underestimate the audience. They're people who come from completely different walks of life experience, and they all have incredible stories. So the thing about participation too is when you have an audience and you've devised a participatory event, the thing that's important, I think, to impart to the audience is that it's a choice to actively listen or actively take part. That it should never feel that you're forced to take part, because taking part is listening anyway. So, and there are often people who say afterwards, look, I'm sorry, I didn't take part, slightly apologetically even, but I wanted to listen. And that's totally, it's all good. I think it's important that it's not a forcing issue.
I think what we are tackling a few other quite exciting questions here, which is to a certain degree that when we are talking about participation and so on, we very often look at that, the discussion or the wish is very much often a little bit like one-sided nevertheless, and the ambition. But the big thing what is changing at the same stage is the whole concept of being a composer or creator or authorship and so on. And that happens with our understanding of things, with different technology, inflecting it. It's like that we are taking as usage as help and so on. We are working with technology that supports us in a different way and so on. And I think which is one of the big challenges with this sort of like collaborative thing, and which has changed very much, is that when we talked about collaboration a few decades ago, we didn't sort of like always perhaps think about we were doing things together, but nowadays, I mean, music, we've been doing things together for quite a while, a long time, so factually it's not a really exactly new thing. But when we're talking about these, nevertheless, we are thinking about that in a different way. And what becomes, and here, of course, a very exciting example, historical example is Jesper taking up Märta Tikkanen, who we both have a connection to. My father was the doctor for Märta, and Henrik Tikkanen, who was Märta is still living, and they were a very famous artistic couple in the Nordic history, who talked very publicly about their relationship, and it's part of very important like feminist literature in the Nordics. But what they were telling about themselves publicly was shockingly daring at that sort of stage in Scandinavian history. and because you didn't talk about yourself. But nowadays, when we are interacting, we are doing things and so on, it's in fact very much more and more presumed that we are living in a transparent society. We are telling all our stories. This is, of course, to allow diversity, multitude, and people, we have the right to be much more open and possibly to be much more open about who we are. But that means too that we more are individuals next to each other. And that means that the collaboration needs to put on table new challenges. And this, I would imagine, that is something that you, for example, when you worked in different communities, really had to deal with. But equally, when you're working with different programmings and so on, with different programs, you realize that, I mean, it's very exciting when we are having discussion about different, in our master thesis class at Sibelius Academy, we are reading sometimes texts, how different technology affects basically different communities. And in Britain, if you go into that tech program, you will probably be a person of that gender and that color. And if you go into that program, it will be a different story. So different technology links to different histories, even if you don't plan that, and so on. But comments?
Clearly, there are societal differences when you're working in different communities, and clearly there are this concept of mutuality becomes very important, and the actual giving of equality and respect to all taking part. Given that, however, you talked about today's society, and of course that is marked by an incredible, in a sense, isolation that we undergo with our phones and our worlds that we create within the phone, our Instagram personalities and our Facebook advertisements and all that sort of thing. And it is an I, me thing, and certainly collaborative and participatory takes the I, me into the realm of the we. And what marks the we is, of course, the joy of giving and sharing. And that is perhaps something we have on our phones, a little activity that's called sharing. We can share information, we can share photos, we can share stories. But in fact, sharing something that you've made with someone else so that they can do something with that, that is somehow an extra step. And I really think that today we have to work hard at putting branches of giving and sharing and joy to around us. It's actually something we have to consciously remind ourselves to do. Otherwise, we lose ourselves in the technology of the immediacy of telephones and the apps within. However, I do love technology, and I love, on the other hand, what it opens up for us. So perhaps you want to join in there. I don't want to sound like a mealy-mouthed technology is bad.
No, but it's of course it's as with everything, different tools make for different results. So when people talk about, since I came to the contemporary music world not from like the classical background, I'd never played in an orchestra, I'd never played an instrument. So when I tried to get my head around that, I tried to like root myself a little bit in the tradition. And then meeting people who were as skeptical of me as the contemporary music world, and like, why are you working with series and why are you working with computers, letting computers compose for you with different software and all this? That's such a strange thing. And then when I started thinking about that a little bit more, like, no, that's a very, very small step compared to the step taken historically, when music went from being something you listened to something you wrote down. That is the major step in musical history. You just heard something, and then all of a sudden it becomes visual, it becomes fixed, it becomes, and then if you start to use techniques for a series or using mathematical formulas to make that on paper or on computer, that's small steps. That's basically just variations of the same thing. But this huge step of changing media for music, that is profound, and it's still profound in everything we do. A little detour, but...
Thanks for mentioning that, because that is the exciting thing when you're working with people from different social areas, divides, cultural experiences. There are some people who are not cognizant of our Western way of writing things down. And so you do have to work in a completely different auditory way. And that is then, of course, for we people who, in a Western sense, rely on things being written down and transferring knowledge in a written way, suddenly we are challenged to have the same auditory processing that someone from another background certainly has. And I'm always amazed at how much one relies in our society on writing down, and how much it can be different in other societies. So there's extraordinary potential for exchange that is just so exciting if we open our eyes and ears to different fluid ways of making music in different societies, in our country, in other countries, with different people.
So I'm realizing we are sort of like setting up a new curriculum on music history. So it's like music of memory, of notation, of grammar, of the instrument, and now we are getting to the history of devices, which are not anymore instruments, sort of. So with the danger of us starting to get towards teaching history from here, perhaps we should sort of like include the audience and see if you have some questions you want to ask us, so that so we are starting to get into coda land on the theme. Any questions or thoughts?
Maybe a thought that these kind of collaborative works I feel that it brings us back to the beginning, because we all have a voice, we have rhythms, inside we have part, and we have like very many rhythms and sounds going on. And before iPads and Spotify and iTunes, we make our music for ourselves. We sang. Like when I was child, I sang to myself. When it was boring, the long way to home, I was singing. And before that, people were singing when they were working, and we are still singing lullabies. So I kind of feel that it's very important to remember that we all have our own voices still, but we listen all the time. I think this is time to listening. We had soundtrack all the time in our ears. So this is very important.
That's a beautiful observation, and it often comes back simply to a snip of the fingers or a clap, and suddenly you're in a whole rhythm of feel and movement. Thank you, Johanna. And I have a question now for Johan. Do you think that we can make a change as musicians and artists in an unstable society of today, in a society of the change, as you talked about it? Do you think we can make a change?
I think it's a scary question to me. I sometimes think in its all oddity, I think I'm a little bit realpolitik now and then, which is probably a bit of a scary thing. We know that having the happiness of teaching music history and so on, and being exciting of society, overarchingly, I think we can prove enormous sort of like possibilities for generating change, but I don't think we can spot the right moment or the right object. I mean, it's and I think very much. I mean, now we are seeing very much music of social engagement, sort of like being written and so on. And we have had protest art. We have very concrete things. So like. Art is something so fluid that if you want with something fluid, do something very exact and so on. And equally, in fact, I had very many sort of like these situations with colleagues who basically, and as you know, in classical music, all colleagues love each other. So there can be the spicy moments when people have opinions about other ones. But moments where sort of like somebody really wants to propose a situation or change or something like that, and suggest that, and then there's the feeling that you come to the concert and a lot of people really gets annoyed because there's like, well, don't you get that I'm quite concerned about this thing already? So basically, I think one of the big challenges is that, especially in certain, especially new music communities, I mean, if you really want to do a change, or I mean, with art production, and you have a lot of art producers and so on, and everybody's like engaged about these questions, and all the other art producers come and listen to that, and they're very serious about that. Everybody will be in that same little loop. And the big question is, of course, breaking these loops and so on, so that they sort of like you really get people who are not really dealing with those sort of things at all to deal with that. And I think that's a too difficult algorithmic question for me to be able to answer it. But I think my idea has always, if you're talking about festival producing and planning and so on, when I sometimes did my first festivals at Musiikin Helsinki, people sort of said that, well, the festival takes a stance on this and that and so on. And I never really thought that the festival made any stances or everything else like that, but basically we are giving the stage for people who have concerns about certain issues. And then you give these like different voicings to different people and put them next to each other so that they start to create a discussion. For getting a good discussion, you shouldn't have people who are all thinking the same. Basically, I mean, you know, you put a panel where everybody thinks the same and it's, gosh, what a boring panel. So basically there needs to be sort of like the provocations and so on. So it's like when the change happens is of course really when these sort of like conflicting things start to generate something. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure it's an answer.
I think that question is more of a discussion anyway. It invites discussion, and I think that's when we are making music, we are testing the grounds, we're investigating, we're researching, we're finding, we're offering, so it creates a fertile ground, doesn't it? And I think at the best, I guess, festival directors, composers, audience members, I think that's something that inside we hope for is something that you can grab onto and engage with, to sort of reach out from the isolation of self. So at the best, that would be super. There surely must be more questions. We've been...
Yep. I write my master thesis about the topic of the concert in crisis, or you could, maybe the word concert is not a good word. Maybe you can also say music performance or music experience. There's also the question, is that a live experience or not? But I'm not going to go into it. I was just wondering what your perspectives are in this participatory aspect of a concert. Is there a crisis for you? Do you think there is one? And if so, in which way is it there? Because I asked myself the question if, as we said now, and as Kathy said, there's always a participation in a concert. But still, I get the idea from what all of you said, that there's also a problem there. And what is this problem that we are talking about? Is it maybe a too wide question? I don't know.
I can have a short go if you turn off this so you don't have feedback again. I think there's, as long as I've been studying and been in the music industry, the concert is in such a crisis. And right now we are in the worst shape ever. And it's funny how long that's been going on, actually. And you always have this feeling. And there's too many elderly people at the concert. And then 20 years later, there's new people there. So, and there are some things that, like, it changes in personal life where your interests go. There's so many things that change, and also the music that is played change. Yes, of course there is a crisis to one extent, and another is it's a living organism, and things tend to change and become different, and sometimes they become things get like spread out and disappear, but I don't really see that happening in the foreseeable future. But change definitely will come, and I think these kind of projects that you're doing, and that will be invigorating for the art scene in general. Like just seeing what can you do with new media, with the new ways of interaction, and new participators on stage and in the hall as audience. And so I think that it's actually more positive than for a long time in many ways. There are like new things to be said and experienced.
I think there is, however, an ongoing crisis in the sense that, I mean, I'm as optimistic as you are, frankly, but there is a crisis in the sense that the culturation of a society can be demolished very quickly if the politics of a country or globally are not concerned with the culturation of society itself. And I think if it's not, the arts is something that, in a sense, it's a most peculiar thing. In Australia, where I came from, the support for the arts during COVID was quite dismal, and many artists had very difficult circumstances, as did many artistic bodies. And the bizarre thing is that the arts and entertainment industry is one of the industries that brings the most revenue to a country. What sort of blindness is that? Absolutely bizarre. So I do think that that we as a society need to take a position on what arts do and why a society includes arts as a high priority.
Well, I would say that the concert crisis, short version, I think we see that a little bit like in everywhere in health, in music and so on, in awareness. And basically when we have better possibilities to understand what happens around, I mean, we could talk about medical things and so on, we can research, we can see more. Of course, the more we research, the more we realize we are unhealthy. So it's like a little bit the same question. We get more aware about qualities, about concert, about more people, audience. I mean, suddenly everybody is not white, male, female, middle class, and so on, but the audiences, the backgrounds of people are shifting and so on. That puts all the time new things on the table. And that means that we get new challenges. So factually, factually the society is evolving with knowledge and so on, and because of that, there's always a small open world. So it's part of our awareness, of course, is to wanting to see ourselves being in crisis all the time, because then we have, so like democracy is one of the best functioning non-functional things, and the other options are quite much worse. So I think it's more a question about that. Do we have any finishing question? I think we are a little bit over time.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what you said with when you touched on like research and health and so on. I think that when speaking to people in charge of music, I tend to use the analogy with the research, with medical research. And if you compare that to music, then our small little world of contemporary music, that is like the base research, the stuff that you don't know what you will have it for. The stuff where things grow and you don't know if it will end up somewhere commercially or not. And the thing with medical research is that that kind of research is actually sponsored by the giants, because they know that if they don't give money to that, nothing will come in 20 years' time. So that is the thing. And that also, if you look historically in my field then in the technology, if you look back 20, 30, 40 years, we wouldn't have sequencers, live electronics, without the centers like IRCAM, without GRM, without all the radio stations around Europe that did this like research in, oh, you can make music with electronic devices. You can make computers. It's like this basic concept that now are used commercially all over in all types of music. So I think that analogy is really important also. Not that art has to be like defended on a monetary level, but it's an important way of thinking, I think.
Any finishing questions? If not, perhaps we call it a day, and thank for the discussion.
And welcome everyone to the concert tonight.
Yes, and yes, I forgot to mention, yes, perhaps a piece, please show up, yes. Well, we are very happy to have you there in a moment. Thank you.